in the description and the forum link to learn more about the build or to jump straight to the specific topic you're interested in. Navigate through this video. This build squeezes out one of the absolute maximum limits of defensive abilities, arguably called a true tank. However, I must note that this is a very expensive setup. I will also upload separate hardcore video showcasing the defeat of the Ravager, Beronath and Callagadra with the active Ascension Shrine granting plus 300% damage, as well as the Shattered Realm 41. The Fire Rataliation Commando has previously appeared on my channel a few years ago, and this guide is a direct update of that one. First and foremost, the foundation here is the Dawnbreaker's duty set, which can rightfully be considered the go-to standard counter-strike retaliation and solid shield blocking. The set significantly boosts health and physical defense, which is critical during the early stages of building the character. It serves as the base and the support of the developing all the other mechanics around it. You might also notice that some of the set items have an additional health regeneration bonus. How did I get that? In Malmut there is a secret smith in the cathedral catacombs who can craft legendary items with this specific bonus. I crafted one of these items myself and a couple of others from the other players in multiplayer. Much more important is prioritizing K stats on your legendary set pieces, such as physical resistance, maximum resistance caps, and bonuses to retaliation damage. For example, on the shield there is a massive difference between having 1700 or 2100 retaliation damage. That noticeably impacts an already modest DPS. Therefore, it's vital to work with the blacksmith or rely on lucky drops to pick gear with the highest damage and physical resistance rolls. Next come health, offensive ability and defensive ability. Every piece of gear can be repeatedly recrafted at the blacksmith to reach optimal values or to close the maximum. The more investment and resources you put in, the higher the item quality and the more stable your game will be. Mask of Infernal Truth by itself, it's a helmet with a very strong defenses, and its a key feature is granting the cluster bomb retaliation. To be honest, in the current meta, the flat retaliation damage added to attack feels quite underwhelming when compared to builds that can step up to 250% attack speed. The cluster bomb travels slowly and only has a couple of charges. Draw your own conclusions. I am not the game developer. They know how it should be. So, the reason of low DPS. Builder's Guard armor provides perfect synergy across the whole range of mechanics, offering a solid boost to retaliation damage alongside great shield mechanics. The skilled bonuses here are especially valuable, as the shield recovery time is one of the crucial overlapping mechanics for the damage absorption. First aim for armor version with the highest physical damage resistance, followed by total retaliation damage, and then the health and OA bonuses. The present task health overall grants more health in total to your character. Resistance matter itself less if you have a full set of green items, as your overall resistance buffs quite high, and OA should be none less than 2800. You can tweak this with components and attribute points. Starting from 2800, your skills begin to shred enemy DA, which greatly speed up cleaning and enables the critical hits. Truth, it is not quite enough. For all super bosses, And armor absorption must always be at 100% for a tank. This is non-negotiable. And finding the off-blades affix on one of the 2 green items is a top priority for Counter-Strike skill. Additionally, affixes of Ulzuin's Flame or Seraphim fit very well nice, since they provide elemental since your character provides elemental resistance reduction, so both of these affixes and suffixes are nice. Gloves and boots can be crafted at the blacksmith. Always choose the armor bonus craft, but if you desperately need a higher damage, lower survivability variant, you can craft using the coin of 3 blacksmith for percentage retaliation damage bonus. It is important to craft boots or gloves that roll with both OA and DA, totaling about from 100 to 112 points. Plain resistant crafts without attributes are rarely the best choice. It also makes sense to eventually roll boots until you hit 6% physical resistance if you don't roll it right away. The belt and medal and greaves should likewise come with OA and DA bonuses, otherwise it makes more sense to substitute them with something like the legendary Ulzin's Torment belt to cover deficient OA and DA instead of a green piece, or swap the medal for Serenity's Commendation. However, the Icrix Scale medal and Drixet leg guards provide K stats, lighting retaliation damage, which is fundamental to the build, and percentage of OA. Overall, if you're prioritizing stats on grid items, health is more of a secondary necessity, while the core priorities is the retaliation damage bonuses, OA, DA, and the wide pool of mixed resistances. Depending on your specific gear pieces, you also need to adapt how you utilize Ascension. If your gear gives plenty of DA but less % of increased armor, then instead of upgrading an item with plus 40 DA bonus, it might be better to craft for plus 16% armor. Aurora Relic provides initiate energy regeneration, which is closely needed along with rare physical resistance. When crafting, prioritizing the maximum physical resistance roll is vital. I personally found the attribute bonus very relevant, since it provides a bit more energy regen, health, OA and DA. The bonus is small but useful. However, if you are playing on the hardcore, I do not recommend Aurora as a relic. Serenity offers higher safety quality due to its cheat death proc, which can protect you from dying on hardcore. Whereas Aurora proc is particularly useless for a tank expected to soak tens of thousands damage. I would even say Aurora is more suited for mid to long range builds. Switching your relic from Aurora to Serenity will also require replacing 1-2 augmentations on your ring's weapon with the energy regeneration bonus, as the baseline energy recovery will drop noticeably and need compensation. Regarding alternative items, if you are terribly unlucky with crafting double rare green items, you can assemble the build entirely out of legendary items. I've put the list on screen, and there is also on Grim Tools link in the video description with the full legendary setup. However, note that you will lose about 40% of your survivability with that setup. Damage might increase slightly, but stats like regeneration and defensive layers will become noticeably weaker. And still, if you don't plan on pushing deep into the Shatter Realm, like Shard 41, trying to max out the Essential Shrine for 400% super boss damage, or trying to stand face first in the middle of thunder attacks, which I strongly advise against under any circumstances, even with top-tier green gear. Then the legendary setup will become more than enough for comfortable playthroughs, and defensive and offensive tributes in the Crucible are also helpful to compensate for resistances if you're running purely legendary gear. Moderately optimal valors for the build to function smoothly look roughly like this. All resistances overcapped by at least plus 40%, none less than 49 physical resistance, at least 45 energy regeneration for casting, between 3000 5500 passive health regeneration, block chance at 59% or higher, maximizing block recovery, 4000 armor scaling up to 5000 after ascension for strong results, and OA of 2800 and DA around 3120, and maximizing retaliation damage bonuses to somehow compensate for the lack of DPS. This is a fully workable formula. It is also essential to have at least a few percentage points of lifesteal, as it helps certain mechanics save your life in critical situations. One of the best class synergies for survivability is Soldier and Demolitionist. Both classes work extremely well for melee builds, providing strong defensive mechanics, as well as bonuses to both direct and retaliation damage. The Soldier is focused almost entirely on defense in this case. There aren't many direct damage bonuses here, just some attack speed and OA, while most of the skills improve survivability, health and regeneration. One of the most important mechanics is Counter-Strike. This build uses a set that works with Counter-Strike and converts it into lightning retaliation damage. It provides very strong AoE source, accounting for roughly 50% of build's total DPS. However, there isn't really enough damage scaling to turn this into a build that kills bosses in 3 seconds. Because of that, pushing Counter-Strike to 26 or even 22 points isn't particularly important. In most cases, investing those points into additional defense gives you more valor than squeezing out of a few percent of retaliation damage on this commando build. Warcry is also one of the strongest defensive mechanics right now. Bosses and monsters hit extremely hard, and Warcry reduces all incoming damage by 25%. You can push this even further if you want to make the build even tankier by moving a few points from military conditioning into Warcry. You can gain additional damage reduction against bosses. And here's Bulwark is another key part of the build's survivability. It provides damage absorption and resistance to life reduction, which are both extremely valuable. This is one of the reasons the build can survive such large amount of incoming damage. However, nullification is a major weakness. If your aura gets nullified, you become much more vulnerable. So you should always try to avoid nullification effects whenever possible. The Demolitionist side is focused much more on offense. It provides retaliation bonuses as well as several caster abilities. That's why I consider this something of an engineer style build. You have Canister Bomb, Grenado with additional charges, and Uzin's Chosen, which further improves retaliation damage while providing additional charges and cooldown related bonuses. So while this is technically a melee build, you can also play it as a melee caster hybrid. If you don't feel comfortable staying in melee range, you can simply reposition and throw your spells from mid-range. This works especially well in High Shattered Realm, where you encounter particularly dangerous fights. For example, Shattered Anasteria can be even more threatening than Kaysan, while Fabius is generally more manageable. Against something like Anasteria, you can simply move on mid-range and kill her from a distance with these casts. That's one of the advantages that this build has. Another major benefit comes from Ulzuin's Vindictive Flame. It provides very good regeneration, total speed, allowing you to move quickly, kite enemies and recover health while doing so. The downside is that it reverses a lot of energy, and this build doesn't have particularly strong energy regeneration. You can compensate for that with potions. One of the strongest defensive mechanics is Blast Shield. When you finally take enough damage that your regeneration can no longer keep up, your health drops below the required thresholds and Blast Shield activates, giving you huge defensive boost and allowing you to recover very quickly. You can effectively rotate Blast Shield with your other defensive cooldowns. When one is on cooldown, the other can cover you until it becomes available again. Flashbang also helps compensate for the build's relatively low offensive ability. I can reach around 3k OA, but that's still not enough for some parts of Ascendant content. Flashbang helps push the OA high enough to get some critical hits on regular content. Against super bosses, however, you barely see any crits. Unfortunately, there isn't really a good way to compensate for this by sacrificing a large amount of defense just to reach 200 more additional OA. You could certainly build around higher OA, more crits and faster kills on a dedicated DPS build, but that approach doesn't work particularly well here. This build doesn't have enough direct damage sources to justify it. Grenade and Canister Bomb have relatively long cooldowns, and your overall DPS is comparatively low. Even if you completely change the devotion setup and manage it to push Grenade or crits up to 700k, it wouldn't really solve the problem because of the long cooldown, so OA isn't perfect on this build, but Flashbang does a good job of compensating for it. Ulzuin's Chosen received a very nice buff with the release of the new DLC, and it now works extremely well for this build. The Devotion Road is mostly focused on defensive mechanics, more armor, DA, OA, to compensate for the shield setup and especially health regeneration. The resistance reduction is not perfect. We have Widow, but not many other sources of resist reduction, and Soldier itself doesn't provide much for elemental resistance reduction. This is one of the reasons that DPS falls below what the build could otherwise achieve. However, I think these defensive layers compensate for the low damage. The build plays slowly, but is very comfortable, and I would consider it highly viable for hardcore because of how much punishment it can survive. Decay Defensive Constellation are Tree of Life, Obelisk of Mangir, and Behemoth. They provide a huge amount of health and defense, which allows me to reach around 40k HP. The highest I managed to reach was about 49k, but that's not really worth it, because the augments are better spent on health regeneration and other defensive stats. For additional damage and other defensive layer, there is Targus Hammer. It works extremely well with the shield, especially when the pressure on your character increases. When you're fighting only one or two enemies, Counter-Strike and Targus Hammer don't do a huge amount of damage, but when you're surrounded by a large number of enemies, both mechanics become much more effective. The more pressure you receive, the more opportunities you have to trigger them. the alchemical elixirs chart shown on the screen. Ranks them from tier 1, most useful, down to tier 3, less critical, which will be the best complement and empower this build. Unfortunately, I don't have recipes for all of them yet, but with them the build will become even stronger. Damage and life still are the most relevant there, and I would definitely also choose armor and block damage. Giving the energy recovery issues, these elixirs can be extremely helpful as well. As for leveling, please respec to this build after level 94, because there is no reason to be Retaliation from the level 1, as this mechanic is not the best to achieve high speed of leveling, so you can choose like some range build, some pistols with fire strike, or taking soldier in melee with cadence on physical or so, and this is the best goal to reach level 94, and after that to switch any retaliation build. No need to take the retaliation types of damage as the leveling guide, as this is not very in the meta of game in 1.3, so I can't give you some nice advices on leveling Soldier and Demolitionist this time. You can check also forum, maybe someone did an explanation about leveling in current meta. I was leveling my second commando on Fire Strike, straight and forward, and this was okay on normal difficulty. The tests on the straight ultimate leveling is not really available, as the boss stats is too high on the low levels. I must notice a few important things about this build. As it has not high DPS, you will have some problems with the nemesis called the Reaper of Wrath, which has abnormal health regeneration in highest charts. Was not able to kill it because its health regeneration was absolutely abnormal, and the other bosses was okay. So this can be a reason to quit some high charts if you want to try them. As for two so-called nemesis, Shirek and Ixal, their nullify mechanics are really dangerous to the melee tank builds such as this, because when you nullified your aura, the defense layers all turn it off and you have much more less defense and health regeneration, and you can just fall. And this is one of the reasons there is no one place standing builds in Grim Dawn. You need to kite, you need to understand boss mechanics, which can be really dangerous. So keep an eye on this nemesis. In Crucible or solo fight, high shards, the lack of energy regeneration is one of the problems this build has, and it can be compensated with some oils and potions, and I am using them frequently for both relics, Aurora and Serenity. This is actual problem that requires to change some augments on the rings or shield or so to compensate the level of energy regeneration, about 45 or so. The Tree of Life also frequently compensates this.